These are the most jaw-dropping mansions across Russia, and they only get crazier as we go. We're talking about a mansion that contains fake passports, gold bars, and a room dedicated entirely to wigs. A palace so enormous, so absurd, and so politically radioactive that it's valued at $1.35 billion and officially belongs to nobody. And a man who built a full replica of the Peterhof Palace, and then just never moved in. Let's get into it. Number 8. The Agalarov estate. When a billionaire decides to build his own country. Most billionaires buy into exclusive neighborhoods, but what if a billionaire thinks that was too modest and decides to build the neighborhood himself? That's Aris Agalarov, the president of the Crocus Group, which is one of Russia's most powerful real estate development companies, and he's been called the Trump of Russia. That's partly for his taste in self-branded luxury developments, but majorly because he and Donald Trump actually did business together, most notably co-producing the 2013 Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. The man runs in specific circles, is what we're saying. His personal estate sits within a 330-hectare private community in the Istra district of the Moscow region. And the first thing worth understanding is that the land itself didn't look anything like this before Agalarov got to it. Standard Moscow region clay soil. Flat, unremarkable terrain. Before a single foundation was poured, he brought in landscape architects and biologists to fundamentally transform the topography, engineering 14 artificial lakes, 7 fountains, and 4 waterfalls into the landscape from scratch. The water system isn't decorative either. It serves a genuine drainage function that sustains an 18-hole championship golf course designed by American architect Cal Olson. The residences within the community, including Agalarov's own, blend what the designers describe as spacious American and sophisticated Italian architecture, built from white natural stone with expansive glazing that opens onto the manicured lake views from every room. A typical home here spans up to 2,500 square meters, managed by smart home systems handling everything from climate to multi-level security. Agalarov's own quarters take that template and amplify it. A 1,500 square meter residence divided into eastern and western wings, so different family members have genuinely separate private territories within the same home. The wellness infrastructure alone, 120 square meter gyms, riverside saunas, Turkish baths, spa terraces, would qualify as a boutique resort anywhere else. Add a private beach club, boat docks for electric vessels, a private hotel accessible only to residence guests, 3 high-end restaurants, the Troon Golf Academy, and a weekend school where instruction runs in English, and you start to understand what curated community means when a billionaire is doing the curating. The Agalarov estate is a masterpiece of engineered luxury, but the next entry on this list is a masterpiece of a completely different kind, one that cost hundreds of millions of dollars and then got quietly abandoned. Number 7. Millerhoff and the Greenfield mystery. The man who built a palace he never lived in. Here's a real estate question worth sitting with. What do you do when you build a replica of the Peterhof Palace on 30 hectares of Russian countryside, complete with formal gardens and imperial fountains, and then decide you don't actually want to live there? If you're Alexei Miller, head of Gazprom since 2001, apparently the answer is you turn it into a venue for reality television shoots and upscale corporate events, and you quietly move into a completely separate $240 million mansion that nobody is supposed to know about. The Millerhoff estate, constructed between 2008 and 2009, is exactly what it sounds like. A personal Versailles modeled directly on the Great Peterhof Palace in St. Petersburg. It covers 30 hectares. It has the fountains, the formal gardens, the whole architectural ensemble transplanted from the 18th century imperial tradition into the Moscow region's modern landscape. Investigators who looked into its funding found a financing structure running through Gazprom contractors, which, given that Gazprom is effectively a state entity, makes the entire thing a philosophically interesting use of infrastructure capital. But Miller didn't live there. The palace was, by multiple investigative accounts, so huge it could be seen from space, and apparently completely wrong for his actual preferences. So it sat. It became an event property, a backdrop for television. Meanwhile, helicopter flight data eventually linked Miller and his partner Marina Yentaltseva to the Greenfield community. a gated development in the Moscow region where his primary residence, valued at $240 million, sits behind a network of shell companies managed by former intelligence officers. The Greenfield mansion has a palatial entrance with columns, a private park, and the kind of anonymity that $240 million specifically buys you in the Russian real estate market. No raids, no footage, no investigative photographs. Just a name in a corporate registry, a helicopter that lands there regularly, and most importantly, $240 million hidden behind shell companies. But let's see how this next man hid 2 entire floors of a house underground, and then sued the newspaper that found out. Number 6. The Barvikha iceberg. Igor Sechin's compound that goes both ways. Igor Sechin is the CEO of Rosneft, a former deputy prime minister and one of the most feared figures in Russian political life. The nickname Darth Vader, which circulates in Moscow's financial circles, isn't ironic, it's descriptive. His residential development in the Barvikha district of Rublyovka is built on a 3-hectare plot valued at approximately $110 million, and from the outside it presents as a palatial Renaissance-style mansion. Impressive, formal, exactly what you'd expect from someone of his standing. What you wouldn't expect, and what investigative reporters eventually discovered, is that the house doesn't stop at ground level. It goes down 2 floors below the surface, making it a 5-story structure where nearly half the living space is invisible from every external vantage point: road, aerial, satellite. This is the iceberg architecture that the Siloviki, Russia's security services elite, have made into something of a design philosophy. The idea is straightforward. You want the space, but you don't want the profile. Every square meter built underground is a square meter that doesn't appear on any planning document, doesn't show up on any aerial survey, and doesn't give any journalist anything to photograph. Here's where the story takes a turn. When the newspaper Vedomosti published an investigation into the mansion's construction, Sechin didn't ignore it or deny it. He sued. And he won. The court ordered the destruction of all printed copies of the relevant edition and the permanent removal of the article from the internet. Not a retraction, not a correction. Destruction of the physical copies and erasure of the digital record. That legal outcome established, as a matter of Russian jurisprudence, that the private properties of top-ranking officials are protected from public scrutiny. The article no longer exists, but the floors underground remain. Next up, we have a billion-dollar complex that the state decided to simply take back. Number 5. The Imeretinsky complex. Oleg Deripaska's Sochi Empire and how Russia reclaimed it. Oleg Deripaska survived the aluminum wars of 1990s Russia, a period of genuine industrial violence where control of the country's metal sector was contested through means that rarely involved lawyers. The fact that he emerged from that decade as the founder of Rusal, one of the world's largest aluminum companies, tells you something about both his resilience and his methods. His most significant Russian asset was the Imeretinsky complex in Sochi, a development that didn't begin as a personal estate but became one. Deripaska invested approximately $1 billion into constructing the Olympic Village and cargo port infrastructure for the 2014 Winter Games. After the closing ceremony, he moved to convert those facilities into luxury hotel accommodations and a private marina stretching 1.5 kilometers along the Black Sea coast with private swimming pools attached to the apartment blocks and the kind of waterfront access that Sochi's geography makes genuinely extraordinary. For a man whose personal residences, a villa in Montenegro, rumored Rublyovka properties, are built to what security analysts describe as KGB-proof standards, with bomb-proof shelters, state-of-the-art private medical rooms, intelligent electronic fencing, and 2-story guardhouses, the Sochi complex represented something different, a commercial asset of enormous scale that he had personally built from the ground up. And then, in late 2022, a Russian court ordered its seizure. The legal pretext was a dispute with the Serious Educational Hub, a project under the direct patronage of Vladimir Putin. The timing, though, aligned precisely with the period during which Deripaska had made rare and public criticisms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, describing it as madness in comments that circulated widely. The $1 billion complex, the one he'd spent years building, converting, and positioning as a Black Sea flagship, was gone, transferred by court order. The message written into that transfer wasn't subtle. In Russia, even $1 billion in concrete and waterfront property is held at someone else's discretion. The next mansion is a government official who technically owns nothing, and yet somehow lives like this. Number 4. Milovka Manor. Dmitry Medvedev's $460 million estate that belongs to a charity. The Don't Call Him Demon investigation, published by Alexei Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation in 2017, became one of the most watched political exposés in Russian history, triggering nationwide protests and introducing millions of people to a concept that Russia's elite had been quietly perfecting for years: the charity-owned personal estate. At the center of the investigation was Milovka, an 80-hectare compound near the town of Plios on the Volga River, built around a historical manor house acquired by the Dar Gift Foundation using funds from Novatek shareholders, technically donated to charity for purposes of historical preservation. The total cost of restoring the manor and building out the modern additions is estimated at 30 billion rubles, approximately $460 million. Medvedev's name appears nowhere in the ownership structure. The estate belongs to a charitable foundation. He just uses it. What's been built on that charitable foundation's land is worth cataloging in full. There's a private downhill ski slope with a dedicated chairlift, which, for a property in central Russia, required engineering the terrain as well as installing the infrastructure. There's a communications tower on site that the Kremlin eventually confirmed was used to provide the prime minister with secure government lines during his stays, which is an interesting amenity for a property he has no official connection to. There's a pond at the center of the estate, and in that pond, there is a specialized house for ducks. The duck house became the symbol of the entire investigation, a small, almost comically specific luxury that somehow crystallized the entire absurdity of the arrangement better than any billion-ruble figure could. It went viral. It appeared on protest signs across Russia. Medvedev's associates, who manage what investigators described as a secret property empire, also including vineyards in Italy and villas in Sochi, all held through preservation foundations and cultural organizations, have never formally acknowledged the arrangement. So, a $460 million estate that officially belongs to charity. What comes next belongs to a man who didn't bother hiding anything, because he had a different kind of security entirely. Number 3. The Wagner stronghold, Yevgeny Prigozhin's St. Petersburg Palace. In June 2023, Yevgeny Prigozhin launched a brief armed mutiny against the Russian military establishment, marched his Wagner Group forces toward Moscow, and then stood them down within 24 hours following a negotiated settlement. 2 months later, he died in a plane crash under circumstances that Russia's investigative bodies described as an accident, and that essentially nobody believed was an accident. In the immediate aftermath of the mutiny, state television cameras were walked through his St. Petersburg mansion for what was framed as a security raid. And what it actually became was one of the most extraordinary real estate tours in modern television history. The aesthetic of the house is traditional Russian palatial. Marble checkerboard floors, ornate silk couches, priceless antiques, the visual grammar of old money applied to new power. That part was expected. What wasn't expected was everything else. Investigators found a fully equipped private medical center, an intensive care bed, a ventilator, advanced diagnostic equipment, functioning as a personal hospital inside a residential property. They found a massive cache of weapons and ammunition. They found gold bars. They found fake passports issued in multiple identities. And they found a wardrobe, a full, dedicated wardrobe, stocked entirely with wigs and false beards, which Prigozhin apparently used to travel undetected across Africa and the Middle East, while conducting Wagner's operations on the continent. In the study, there was a sledgehammer. Oversized, clearly kept as a trophy rather than a tool, inscribed with the phrase, "for use in important negotiations." The Wagner Group had by that point become publicly associated with using sledgehammers in ways that don't require elaboration. It was sitting on a shelf in his study like a paperweight. And then there was the prayer room, a private chapel densely decorated with Russian Orthodox icons, reflecting what appeared to be genuine religious devotion. Hanging elsewhere in the same house was a framed photograph that investigators described as depicting the decapitated heads of his enemies. The house held all of it simultaneously, without apparent contradiction, which, in its own way, is the most revealing detail of all. And now, the man who built a home that Russia officially considers one of the most expensive private residences in the country. Number 2. The Rublyovka domain of Alexei Usmanov, where imperial taste meets industrial scale. Alexei Usmanov is the kind of billionaire whose holiday homes cost $50 million, and whose holiday homes represent, by his own portfolio standards, a relatively modest line item. His primary Russian estate in Rublyovka is frequently cited by investigators and real estate analysts as one of the most expensive private residences in the country. The entrance announces itself immediately. Statues of lions flanking the gate, a formal fountain, an alley of ancient mature trees leading toward a main house that reads less like a private home and more like a ministerial palace. The scale of the property, the formality of its landscaping, and the grandeur of its architectural approach place it in a category shared by maybe a handful of private residences anywhere in Russia. Usmanov built his wealth through Gazprom Invest Holding and subsequently consolidated metallurgical assets that became the Metallo Invest empire. He was also an early investor in Facebook, a bet that generated returns that, combined with his industrial holdings, pushed his net worth into the tens of billions. The Dilbar, his personal yacht, holds the record for the largest yacht in the world by gross tonnage. The man thinks in a specific scale, and his real estate reflects it. The interior standards of Usmanov's properties are best understood through what investigators found when they raided his Bavarian villa following sanctions imposed after 2022, because his foreign properties operate at the same standard as his Russian ones. Safes containing Fabergé eggs, a 750 square meter bathhouse, a 20-meter indoor pool. These aren't the highlights of a German vacation home. They're the baseline of how Usmanov furnishes a property he doesn't use as his primary residence. His primary residences are served by a permanent retinue of at least 30 staff, bodyguards, private chefs, household managers, accommodated in dedicated wings built specifically for their use. That staff infrastructure isn't a luxury add-on. It's load-bearing. A property of this scale doesn't function without it. Usmanov has, since sanctions, largely retreated from the public-facing billionaire lifestyle he once maintained across Europe. The Rublyovka estate remains, physically, geographically, and in terms of sheer material investment, the anchor of everything he built. An empire that started with Soviet-era metallurgy, ran through Silicon Valley, and came to rest behind a gate flanked by stone lions on the most prestigious road in Russia. And yet, this is not the most expensive property on this list, not even close. Because number 1 doesn't officially belong to anyone. Number 1, Cape Idokopas, the $1.35 billion palace that nobody owns. Let's establish the number first, because it needs a moment. $1.35 billion. That is the valuation placed on the property at Cape Idokopas, near the Black Sea resort town of Gelendzhik, by the investigators who documented it. Alexei Navalny's foundation described it as the world's largest bribe. The Kremlin describes it as not belonging to Vladimir Putin. Both of these things have been stated publicly, and you are welcome to draw your own conclusions. What is not disputed is the property itself, because it exists, and it has been documented in considerable detail. The main structure covers 17,691 square meters, approximately 190,000 square feet, designed in an Italianate style by architect Lanfranco Cirillo and set within a 74-hectare estate. That estate is surrounded by a 7,000-hectare buffer zone managed by the FSB, Russia's Federal Security Service. The property has its own no-fly zone. It has a maritime exclusion zone enforced along the Black Sea coastline below it. There is a gas station on site, a 2,500 square meter guest house referred to in documentation as the Tea House, an arboretum, an amphitheater. Now for the interior, because this is where the documentation gets genuinely extraordinary. There is an aquadisco, an aquatic disco arrangement adjacent to the indoor swimming pool with fountain choreography integrated into the entertainment infrastructure. There is a room that investigators identified as a striptease hall, featuring a pole dancing stage with gilded finishes. There is an underground ice hockey rink, subterranean, built over 2 helipads, reflecting a well-documented personal enthusiasm for the sport. And there is a tunnel cut into the cliffside leading to beach access, featuring a tasting room positioned for what the documentation describes as the best possible view of the sea. Then came the mold. The Black Sea climate, combined with apparently faulty ventilation in a building of this scale, produced a mold infestation significant enough to require stripping the entire interior back to bare concrete. A $1.35 billion building, gutted by humidity. By 2024, reports indicated that the renovation had taken the opportunity to make some adjustments. The casino was converted. The pole dancing room became a chapel dedicated to Saint Vladimir. The aquadisco apparently remains. The security infrastructure of Cape Idokopas operates at a level that has no real comparison in private residential real estate anywhere in the world. This is not a billionaire's compound. It is a sovereign installation, a physical jurisdiction unto itself, maintained by state security services, protected by exclusion zones that extend into international airspace and coastal waters, and owned officially by no one. It is, by any measure, the most extraordinary piece of residential real estate in Russia, and the most politically charged, and the most expensive. And according to the Russian government, it has absolutely nothing to do with the man who runs the country. Make of that what you will. And that's a wrap on the most luxurious and mysterious mansions across Russia, from Agalarov's engineered paradise to a cliffside palace with its own no-fly zone. If this one was worth the watch, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Global Status. And lastly, drop a comment on which property actually broke your brain the most. Catch you in the next one.